Hi, I'm Theo, and these broadcasts are to support the blogs on NoMoreSea.com's website as well as the online classes. In this episode, we explore Christ as the firstborn. Part 2, the example of Reuben and Joseph. Welcome back to another episode of NoMoreSea.com's broadcast. And we're here today continuing our series on Christ the Firstborn. We're in part 2, where we consider the example of Reuben and Joseph to help us understand what the New Testament authors mean by Christ being firstborn. Okay, so to better understand this terminology of the firstborn, I think this is important for me to go to this verse. First Chronicles chapter 5. Verse 1, it says the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel. So there's our term. Okay, I'm using the ESV based off the Hebrew, but you'd have the same in the Greek. The firstborn of Israel. Now, who's Israel? Israel is Reuben's father. Remember, Jacob is renamed by God Israel. So Jacob is a way for us to understand the way to understand who Israel is, because Jacob had 12 sons, and from those sons comes the nation of Israel, and Jacob is renamed Israel. And his firstborn son is Reuben, from his first wife, Leah. So Reuben is the first one to pass through the womb that is a child, a generation of Jacob. So he's the firstborn of Israel. Why? Because he was the firstborn. The sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn. Why are we saying that? See how this verse does not make sense unless you think about it for a minute? Reuben's the firstborn of Israel. Why? Because he's the first one to pass through the womb. He's Jacob's first generation. But because she defiled his father's couch, his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that he could not be enrolled as the oldest son. Now, interesting. Why Joseph? Why does it pass to Joseph? Why not the next son? You know, Reuben's first. Well, who's second? Who's third? Who's fourth? Well, let me tell you who is third. Second is Simeon, and maybe that doesn't matter to you. The third, Levi. Well, the Levites. Fourth is Judah. Well, the Jews, Judah. It doesn't pass to any of those. It doesn't pass to any of the numbers. Why? Interesting. You think about it for a minute here. What does it pass to? It passes to Jacob's next firstborn, the first one to pass through the womb of the second wife, Rachel. Now, Rachel's barren, and obviously Jacob wanted to marry Rachel first, and he was deceived by Laban, her father, his uncle, and so he got Leah first instead. And so she had the firstborn in Reuben. And so Jacob was swindled, even as he's a swindler. And he was swindled and produced Reuben. But then what he wanted was Rachel. And when he finally got Rachel, she's barren. And what he and Rachel want is a son who'll be the firstborn. Because you want to pass on this inheritance we've been talking about. You want to pass on your inheritance to the next child. And so you want to kind of choose. I want, when I die, everything to go through this wife and her firstborn son. I'm choosing that. I want to make that choice. And what Jacob wanted was Rachel. And what Jacob and Rachel wanted necessarily was what? That child, her first son, to be the one to inherit everything. Right? That's what they wanted. That's not what they got. And later Rachel's upset with Jacob, and Jacob's like, am I God? Can I give sons? Can I give you anything? I can't do anything. Only God can do that. So this is obviously not God's plan. It's our plan and what we thought God wanted. Now, what's interesting is Jacob himself is not the firstborn, but he is able to swindle that status away from the actual firstborn Esau. So he's not even the firstborn of his father, of Isaac. And yet he swindles his way into that. And then he gets swindled and ends up with Reuben because he accidentally marries Leah. Apparently he didn't know because of A, just shorthand here, quick answer, A, because of it was at night, he's probably drunk, and she probably wore a veil. So those are some ways that it got mixed up. And he wakes up the next morning, and he's sober, and it's light, and she doesn't have any clothes on, and it's not Rachel. Okay? So he gets Reuben. But then Reuben messes up. He's the firstborn. He's the first one to pass the womb, but he messes up. It doesn't pass to Levi, the tribe of priests. It doesn't pass to Judah, the tribe of kings. Interesting. It passes to Joseph, who is also the firstborn. So, technically, you could say that Adam is the first human, according to the Bible, right? But Christ is the next one. And so there is a stream of thought through the people of God in both testaments, both parts of our Bible, plus in the other literature that surrounds our Bible about the Messiah being son of Joseph. The Messiah being a son of Joseph, in the sense that he's the firstborn. So you have this language of the firstborn, and Christ being the firstborn. He's not first. He's 2,000 years ago, and Adam is definitely before 2,000 years ago. So look at Luke chapter 3. Look at all the generations from Jesus all the way through. So the firstborn of the first creation, but look at, and that all got messed up. But look at the firstborn of the second creation, the second Adam, the last Adam. Just like the swap between Jacob and Esau leads to the swap to reverse everything, to fix everything. Because of what Jacob did with Esau and because of all that, then we have this swapping of everything around. It's kind of amazing. Rachel and Rebecca, they kind of have these ideas of what's supposed to happen because it's inside them. But then, just like Abraham and Sarah, we as humans try to help God out with God's plan, and it's supposed to be Isaac. Again, how can Isaac be Abraham's firstborn? He can't. It's impossible. Isaac is not the firstborn. If you go by who is first, that's Ishmael. But he is Sarah's firstborn. So he is firstborn. Because he's the first one to pass through Sarah's womb. Even though he's not the first one for Abraham. And yet God's plan was the Isaac. And then they tried to help God out and produce the Ishmael. And so what you have here is trying to understand what we got going on with the word firstborn. And it's wonderful to do that with Abraham's family, because Isaac is firstborn and Joseph is firstborn. They are the first to pass through the womb. Isaac passes first and only through Sarah. So it's who passed through the womb first. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the order of sons and all that, because it doesn't work. Because if we do, and it can get confusing when you're talking about firstborn in the Old Testament, get confusing with Reuben. Because it should next, the inheritance, if we're going to disqualify Reuben, then the next one is going to be Simeon. Well, we disqualify him for what happened at the rape of Dinah, and then we go to Levi. Well, we disqualify him because what happened also with Simeon. Well, then we go, and what's interesting is Levi is chosen by God, in a sense, to replace what we said earlier. So, consecrate me all the firstborn, whichever is first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both man and of beast, is mine. So, in Exodus 13, what God is saying is when there is an animal that has the first one, doesn't matter if it's the best or whatever it is, it's the first one to come through. It's the first one. Okay, in the ancient world, you have humans that are their women are trying to have many babies, and oftentimes they have stillborn and they have problem pregnancies because they did not have the nutrition that we have today, nor the healthcare system that we have today. So you have women that have lots of children, and of those children, many die in the process of those 9 months, or in the process of birth, or shortly thereafter, or life itself, and they don't make it to, have their own children. Okay, so life is just full of challenges and they die. Okay, so you have all that. So we're talking about the first to pass through the womb. Okay, so it doesn't matter if the first animal to pass through the womb is blind, or the first animal, whatever it is, the first animal, you need to take that first animal to the temple, and it is to be sacrificed unless you make arrangements with the priest and God makes a way that you can then take that animal and you can exchange money or sacrifice for that. But otherwise, that belongs to God. The first one to pass through belongs to God. The first one to pass through belongs to God. Same thing with the children. It's the first one. The first one to open the womb. Here it is. Whatever is first to open the womb. That's what it means to be firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb, that belongs to God. But in exchange for that, I'll take Levi as my priest. Interestingly, God takes Levi. Yet Levi is just as disqualified as Simeon in the whole rape of Dinah incident. And of course, we know that Reuben is disqualified. And if you go down to Judah, well, Judah can be disqualified too, because the whole Tamar incident. And Judah left the father's house over what we don't know why, but it's not explained, but Judah has left the father's house. And so then you get into all the other children that are born, and you're like, well, it just doesn't make any sense. Well, now it does, because if the firstborn is whatever is the first to open the womb, then Simeon didn't first open the womb. But Joseph did. Joseph did. So then you begin to see how this works. So God uses different ways. So you need to understand firstborn and not in order of who's born when on the calendar. Okay, this one was born in this year, and then 9 months later this is born, and 9 months later this is born. And no, we're not talking first in that sense. We're talking about the first one that opens or passes through the womb. So that's key. And if you begin to understand that, now the Jacob and Esau thing is tricky, but they were to pass through. They're both in the womb at the same time, but still Esau's the firstborn because he passes through first. So he's the firstborn because he's the one to pass through first. So that's what we're talking about. And then, what God's plan was, God revealed himself to Rebekah what the plan was for Jacob, who becomes Israel. God reveals that, even though Esau's the firstborn. And Joseph and Rachel, somehow by virtue of their love for each other, still kind of understand something else is to happen, and ends up happening. Jacob, Israel, gets what he wants in the end. Unfortunately, Rachel doesn't see it because she passes away when she has her second. But Joseph does get that, according to 1 Chronicles 5:1. Joseph gets that status. As the firstborn, he takes over. But he's the first to pass through the womb of who they originally wanted to. So time is not necessarily of essence So we have to carefully think about these words and how they're used and how all of this plays into it to help us to understand why Jesus is called the firstborn. But does that mean that he's not God? Does that mean he's not a member of Trinity? Does that mean he's only a human? Does that mean all these things that people try to make them out to be? Well, they don't take the time to then look at how the Bible uses the word firstborn. Okay, so I think First Chronicles 5:1 does a really good job of it. Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn. And why is he the firstborn of Israel? Why do we have to say this another time? For he was the firstborn. He was. But then he defiled his father's couch. So that delegitimized his birthright. And who does it go to? The firstborn. It goes to Joseph, because there is another firstborn. In the Hindu culture of where I'm at, a man marries a woman, and if she does not give him children, or specifically sons, then it can be a practice. He has the choice in the Hindu culture to marry a second wife. And so there are many instances. And there is a famous Christian movie that does this, where that happens. A man marries a woman. Nayagrito is the name of the movie. A man marries a woman. Okay? Marries a woman. No children. He marries a second woman so that he can have children. And he bears children. But then he finds out that the first woman ends up having the children after all. And so then he's already gone through the process of marriage. So he's attempting to have a generation, he's attempting to have a seed. And why do we do all this? Think about this. Why do we do all this? Well, we do all this because of death. Because we're dying, we need to have seed. And we want to have a son to pass things on to in a patriarchal society. So you get married, you try to have a son. You can't have a son, then you get married to another woman and try. So you're trying with both. And it can vary on which woman will have. And it can get interesting, I guess, if the problem is the man. If the man has a problem. Which today's doctors can check things out and figure all that out. But in the ancient world, no one knows. Obviously, with Abraham, it was Sarah's problem because he had Ishmael. But Isaac is also firstborn. Because Isaac, it's not that Ishmael is 13 years or 12, whatever years older than Isaac. And it's not that he came first. Isaac is still a firstborn. Okay? Same thing with Reuben and Joseph. They're both firstborn sons of Jacob, Israel. But because Reuben messes up, then it falls to Joseph. So you do have this idea that Reuben is first because he was first. So, okay, that is true. But then because he messes up, it doesn't fall to Simeon and all the other brothers that are older than Joseph. It falls to Joseph. So this is the problem when we start trying to decide firstborn and we start trying to do time-wise, and Jesus comes 2,000 years later, 2,000 years ago, and Adam is way beyond before that. Well, we said Jesus is the beginning. He's even before all of that. But he's fully God. And that's what the church taught and continues to teach. And so for you to think that Jesus is a mere human, you have to go against the record of the Bible and have to go against the record of the church. And that's just your opinion. And that's your private interpretation. But that's not the tradition that has been passed down to us. You have to go against the tradition that's been carefully preserved and passed down to us. And through your own private interpretation, decide that is the case. So hopefully this excursion to understand Firstborn through Joseph and Reuben helps you understand how the last Adam is able to be firstborn. Well, so is the firstborn, first Adam. See, so it can get kind of tricky, but you just have to take time to think this through carefully. So yeah, none of this can be done in 5 minutes, but if you do your 5 minutes a day, and eventually you'll work yourself up to being able to think through all these things. And, I like to think that, you could do a morning and evening where you do your 5 minutes in the morning and then you think about it all day. And then in the evening you think about it, and then you go to sleep, and then you get up and you decide, okay, now what am I going to do? And maybe even in the evening you decide, what am I going to do for my 5 minutes tomorrow? And you can begin to study all these things out. And then they come together and you can be able to work it out on your own and try to see. So he's preeminent even in the new creation. And he shows us the way that we fail. Join us in part 3, where we continue the discussion, beginning with the example of Mary on the No More Sea broadcast, Firstborn. Thank you very much, and God bless you for listening. Stay tuned for more episodes in videos to help you with your journey from nomoresea.com.